So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? First up, I would like to invite Francis to the stage to give a brief introduction to the Leeds Center of New Chinese Writing. Francis, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can indeed. Give me 1 second. So if you'd like to just give a quick introduction to the Leeds Center, Francis.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you to what I've now discovered is pronounced Sinoist Books. I apologize. I have always been pronouncing it Sinoist Books, so I will change that in future. Sorry, Daniel. And thank you very much to Sinoist Books for co-hosting this event with us. We're delighted to be featuring Su Tong as our monthly featured author for this month in our book club. And that means that you can read a short piece of prose, a short essay by Su Tong on our website, which is called Why Can't I Write Essays? That several of our students have already been interested in that topic. It's translated by Yuan Hai Wang, who I believe is with us today. And you can either read it in English or in Chinese, the original, or 为什么不会写杂文? And I think that this concept of prose essays is going to be something that our talks today are going to focus on. So it brings it all together rather nicely. The Leeds Center for New Chinese Writing, the website and the link to the book club Sarah has just put on the chat there, exists really to help promote contemporary Chinese writing in English translation in the UK and border afield. Okay, I don't want to take up much time because there's far more important people than me to be talking today, so I'm going to pass this back to Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Francis. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. I'd like to introduce some of the VIPs we have today, both in translators as well as experts. First, we have, of course, the lovely Nikki Harman. Passionate about spreading Chinese literature to English readers, Nikki Harman has translated the works of many renowned Chinese authors into English. They include Jia Pingwa's Happy Dream, Gao Xing, Yan Ge's The Chili Bean Paste Clan, and of course, one part of Su Tong's newest prose collection, The Open Air Cinema. Harman has won several awards, including the Multi-Cup People's Literature and Chinese to English Translation Prize of 2015 and the 2020 Special Book Award of China. When not translating, she promotes contemporary Chinese fiction and general English language readers through the website paperrepublic.org. She also blogs, gives talks, mentors new translators, teaches summer schools, and judges translation competitions. She lives in the United Kingdom and tweets as China Fiction Book Club at CFBCUK on Twitter. Nikki, can you hear us? Hello, Nikki.
Myself, yes.
Brilliant, brilliant.
I can hear you. Thank you very much for your kind introduction.
Thank you. Next, we have James Trapp. James Trapp has an honors degree in Chinese from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, with special papers on pre-Han archaeology and early Buddhist scripture. After graduating, he spent 10 years as an art dealer working for companies based in New York and Hong Kong. Ooh, we're just getting some noise. Give me 1 second. Let me see what that is. Okay, there we go. And subsequently, with the rise of Mandarin in UK school, he refocused on making Mandarin accessible to young learners. At the British Museum, he coordinated China provisions for schools and author materials for the first Emperor exhibit in 2007 and the Ming exhibit in 2014. Then at UCL's Institute of Education's Confucius Institute, he led a 5-year project to promote and support the study of Mandarin as a modern foreign language in primary schools and production of a comprehensive program of study for primary Mandarin. He has a focus for the constructive use of Chinese art and culture and Mandarin teaching, and is developed in his classroom and after-school clubs across a wide range of primary and secondary schools, as well as his works in the British Museum. His translation includes new version of Sun Tzu's The Art of War and Lao Tzu's The Dao De Jing, and then for Alan Charles Asia, Wang Hongjia's Final Witness and Ma Pinglai's The Elm Tree. When not translating, James can be found walking his dog, Pebbles, and perfecting his version of classic Sichuan dishes. Next up, we have Hai Wang Yuan. Haibang Yuan is a professor of Western Kentucky University, a Fulbright student. He received his MA American History from Indiana University in Bloomington. He has authored and co-authored many books, including Mastering Modern Chinese Through Classics, Rooterage, 2018, and This is China, The First 5,000 Years, Berkshire, 2010. Among his translations are Songs of the Forest by Zhang Wei and Different Camella by Jostin Jobrus. I hope I didn't pronounce that wrong, Dr. Yuan. And finally, we have Jin Jijin is a professor at the School of Liberal Arts in Suzhou University, the director of overseas sinology research, and the executive vice president of Tang Wenjie College, and the chief expert of major projects of the National Social Science Foundation. His research includes Chinese modern and contemporary literature and the overseas communication, modern Sino-foreign literature relations. The main works include Qianzhong Shu and the Modern Western Studies, the Old Fan and Jinji Dialogue, Chen Quan, A Mirror from a Foreign Country, Another Voice, Views of Each Other, Comprehensive Study of Modern Chinese Literature and English, and Jinji Selected Literature Review. He has also acted as the editor-in-chief and co-editor of classic translations of Western Modern Criticism, Overseas Modern Chinese Literature Research Translation, Suzhou University Overseas Sinology Research Series, and the Cosmopolitan Humanist Vision. And then finally, we have Sinos Books, that's us. Sinos Books is a UK-based independent press that publishes only the best of translated literature and contemporary fiction. Our mission is to act as a bridge between Chinese and English-speaking worlds, so that the best of Sinophone authors and their works can transcend the language barrier. We believe that the literature is a summation of the struggles, aspirations, and ideals of authors, and only by appreciating them can we truly achieve a deeper level of understanding. We partner with award-winning translators and maintain the highest editorial and design standards to ensure that these titles are presented in their best possible light. We pair these titles with energetic marketing campaigns and event campaigns in order to introduce English readers to these gems of Chinese literature and culture. Now, after all that, I'm sure you're all eager to know about the star of today's show, and that is Su Tong Lao Shi. And in order, I think I'll hand off to James to give a brief introduction on him. James, can you hear us?
I can indeed, yes. I must also apologize because you may also get to hear pebbles because I'm on my own in the house, and if anyone comes to the door, she's going to explode. So apologies in advance if that does happen. So yes, good afternoon, everybody, or indeed 晚上好 to everybody who is joining us from China. It's quite a daunting task given the presence of the man himself, but I've been asked to give you a brief introduction to the author of the book we're launching in translation today, Su Tong. But if ever there was an occasion to use the traditional television presenter's phrase, and now a man who needs no introduction, this is really it. Not only is Su Tong one of the most famous contemporary authors in China, he is also one of only a very small handful of Chinese writers whose name will be recognized by literary enthusiasts in the West. Su Tong is, of course, a pseudonym, a nom de plume used by Tong Zhonggui as a punning reference, I believe. I hope he will correct me if I'm wrong, both to his real name and to his place of birth, which has such an influential role in his writings. For any non-Chinese speakers with us, the Su is the Su of both Suzhou, the town of his birth, and Jiangsu, the province in which it's situated. And Tong means child or youth. So together, I think the name could be interpreted as child of Suzhou or child of Jiangsu, or maybe even child of the South. But I really shouldn't be trying to put words into his mouth. So as I say, I hope he will correct me if I'm mistaken in that. Su Tong was born in Suzhou in 1963, and he went to university at Beishida, Beijing Normal University, in 1980. And began publishing short stories in 1983. His output since then has been prolific, with 7 full-length novels and over 200 novellas and short stories. It's with the latter, his novellas, that he first really came to wider notice beyond literary circles, both inside and outside China. 2 of these, published in consecutive years in 1990 and 91, were turned into films. Zhang Yimou's film Raise the Red Lantern Da Hong Deng Long Gao Gao Gua, which is my favorite film title in Chinese, came out in 1991 and is an adaptation of the novella Wives and Concubines. It went on general release in the West and in England. And I remember seeing posters for it on the London Underground at the time. And subsequently, I frequently used it in my secondary school classroom teaching, where it was universally enjoyed. The film was nominated for a host of foreign film awards in the West, including the Academy Awards themselves, and it won the Silver Lion at the Venice International Film Festival. Hongfen, translated into English as Petulia's Rouge Tin, was actually made into two films, in English, Blush and Rouged Beauties. The former won major awards in both Berlin in Germany and in India. But really, I shouldn't let myself be distracted by the vain glitter of the silver screen, as Su Tong is first and foremost one of the most important prose writers working in China today, and one of the most translated, particularly into French and English. In 2009, he was awarded the Man Asian Literary Prize for his work, The Boat to Redemption, the second Chinese writer to win the prize. And in 2011, he was nominated for the Man Booker International Prize. 2015, he was co-winner of the Maodong Literature Prize for Huang Queji, which we translated as Sinoist. I too say Sinoist, but Shadow of the Hunter. The most important of his works in English translation are Raise the Red Lantern, the three novellas that comprise that, Rice, My Life as Emperor, Mad Woman on the Bridge, Binu and the Great Wall of China, The Boat to Redemption, Tattoo, another set of three novellas, Petulia's Rouge Tin, Shadow of the Hunter, and now, of course, Open Air Cinema. All of these are available on Amazon, certainly in the UK, if you care to look. I think it's fair to say that Su Tong's writing comes as something as a surprise to Western audiences who have an old and well-worn preconception about Chinese literature, most of it dating from the 1930s, 1920s and 1930s probably, if not much earlier. His books are direct, challenging, uncompromising and unflinching in the way they address uncomfortable subjects, notably violence against women and the destructive personal effects of social and political change. He is a reinterpreter of ancient myths and legends and a creator of modern ones. Like the stories of many ancient civilizations, although there's an undeniable darkness to his books, they are leavened by an understanding of human nature and a sometimes dark but always sympathetic humor. He's a difficult author to categorize, but that's no bad thing, except for people obsessed with categorizing things. And he has an unmistakable and unique voice, which both challenges his readers and draws them in. In that respect, Open Air Cinema, the book whose launch we're celebrating today, is perhaps the ideal first read for someone who wants to explore and enjoy Su Tong's work, as it offers vivid snapshots of many of the author's angles and points of view, some profound, some much more lighthearted, and many of which are found in their full depth and complexity in his novels. I can thoroughly, not just because I translated part of it, but because it's a fascinating read, I can thoroughly recommend it. And with that, I shall hand back to Daniel, and I believe following Daniel, the man himself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, James. I think we've all gone on long enough. I think we should bring out the man that everyone is here to see. And Su Tong 老师啊，您听得见我们吗？您
非常感谢今天有这个机会。
Thank you so much for inviting me today to have this online meeting with all of you. First of all, I'd like to extend my gratitude to 4 translators, Oliver, James, Nikki, and Haiwang Yuan. It's because of your joint effort that my collection of essays could be published. I also appreciate Ms. Wang Ying's help and the publication of my book. I have been writing essays for a long time, but I don't have many essays being published. My interest on prose started in 90s and it lost to 2010. So it was not a lot for me. From my point of view,
对散文的理解其实跟大多数的就是中国的
essays
文学爱好者或者是作家
in my mind have the similar concept as that in many other authors' mind.
都能想到是鲁迅是鲁迅先生。
There are 2 figures we definitely will think of when talking about essays. First, Lu Xun.
那么我们都是被他的光所照亮的。
Everyone is actually on this giant's shoulder.
他是
He is unsurpassable.
在我的心目当中就是
In my view, he is the god of essay. Another author I love is Shen Congwen.
我大概年轻时代看过沈从文的。
When I was young, I read his book and I was astonished. How could a person write so brilliant words to describe the world, both dynamically and statically? He can record human nature through his words.
那一年我就很有兴趣，就是我一般不是个特别钟爱旅行的
I'm not usually a person who loves travel, but I went to Xiangxi
其实就是因为沈从文的文字。
because of Shen Congwen's words. So I totally understand how charmful or how attractive essays can be.
说作品
Their impact cannot be dwarfed by novels.
爱散文，但是我自己
I
一直觉得
am so passionate and love essays, but I'm afraid of writing it.
说创作上
I put my emphasis on novels.
是这么一个情况。那么
So that's the case.
这个我很高兴的，这个
I'm so glad to have my book published. In my book, Open Air Cinema, I've selected most of the proses I love. James mentioned that the city Suzhou has great impact on me and my creation. I admit it's closely linked to my creation, especially when it comes to my essays. Every piece of my essay has the vibe unique to Suzhou. You can hear the sound of the raindrops in my essays. You can see those Suzhou travelers to record their memories when they were walking in Suzhou. In all of my novels, I couldn't convey my connection with Suzhou as precise as in my essays.
我有某种欲望啊，想
I
替
have
这
the
个
desire to do expressions for this city.
这么一个城
I
市，
want to make my voice for this city.
在多少年来，在几千年的这个
Over thousands of years of history and civilization, I think it has a lonely soul.
我希望在我的散文当中，有时候能捕捉到这一颗孤
I
独
hope
的灵魂，
that I can capture this lonely soul in some of my essays
记录
and use my own words
所以
to record its details.
这个散文，大家看到它牵扯到苏州的市民生活，
My essays cover life of Suzhou people
背景很多是放在我小时候的
and the backgrounds.
年代或者80年代
But usually, the background in my essay is in the 1970s and 1980s,
小城啊，那么
and
童年时代
how these people
所有的痕迹
impacted this old ancient town.
当中都有体现，尤其是
My grow up
露天电影
experience
露天电影
is totally
我小时候的生活，
immersed in this town.
因为70年代的时候，
In 1970s,
大家知道啊，像
as you know,
在座的季经啊，像王勇老师啊，他可能都记得那个70年代初，我那时候是个孩子，就是正好是
at that time I was only a
那
child.
时候是没有什么娱乐生活的啊，
There wasn't much entertainment.
就是过节啊，看
Watching a film would be the celebration in festivals.
可是呢，这个电影院，也不是每天都有
However,
新的电影，
there wasn't new films being released every day, so there were only a few old films being released every day.
我住在苏州城与苏州的郊区，非
I
常
was living at a suburb of Suzhou.
我家在从我家这条街上再往那个往北走，
If you go to the north of to my house, about 2,000 kilometers, you can see lots of fields with vegetables there.
经常会听到一个消息说啊，
So
某
when I
某
was a little child, I always heard the news that there was someone going to, there was some film on show
今天
someday.
放一部新的电影，
I was always wondering whether there will be a new film
你说你也
being
不想看
released.
多一遍，但是你期望，你抱了一个期望，今
You
天
will hold this expectation
5公里
that I would definitely go these 5 kilometers to that village because they were going to have an open air cinema and a new film will be released. There will be a wild and really large field. A big screen would be put up.
那个3公里、5公里之外的村子，
So I would walk 3 to 5 kilometers from the downtown to the suburb or the village just for the probably release of a new film. But usually it turned out to be an old film. What should I do? I have to sit there or even stood there because there was no space. And I would finish this film. I could even recite those lines in the films. I could read out with those actors and actresses.
电影结束了，
Finally, the film ended. Villagers would took away their chairs conveniently
我呢就惨了，
and go back home, but I couldn't because I had to walk another 3 to 5 kilometers.
还能看得见公路上的
When I
公路
went that way,
路上还是亮的，
I could still walk with light because it was in the dawn.
电影结束的时候，
But after the film, it was totally darkness.
所以就是很惨。我从公路上回
It
来，
was
所以我
poignant.
电影里头有个场景，
There was unseen in my open air cinema book, I would run across a graveyard.
那就是我的少年时期。
That's what I did for watching a film.
经验啊，所以我把这个回忆、这个记忆都写在了一个。
I recorded all my memories in this book, Open Air Cinema.
所以我现在有时候偶尔我回读一遍，我觉得啊。
When I read back,
完全不是虚构啊。
I can confirm that all of these are true. They are not fictional. Through essays, I don't convey my perspectives towards the world. I would try to express myself. And maybe that would make some people relate. That's all for me right now. And thank everyone for coming here, because we all know the pandemic makes things life and difficult. So I just want to thank everyone again. That's all from me.
Thank you so much for that, for your words, Su Tong. Next up, we have Nikki Harmon, who will give a reading from her her section of Open Air Cinema. Nikki, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can indeed.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm delighted to be here today, and I got to choose my own bit, and it is one of my favorite vignettes. I had a couple that I really liked, but I particularly like this one because I thought it had a very modern resonance. It's the kind of thing you could imagine happening, if not today, not that long ago. So you've got this barber shop traditionally run by men for men, and they can say what they want, and so on. But one day this young woman turns up. She's been sent to cut hair, and it throws the cat amongst the pigeons. And it's really charming. I think it's really funny. It's not very serious. I don't think Su Tong is making a serious point about gender politics. And actually the ending is quite amusing. But it's lovely. So here we go, the barber's shop. The barber's at the north end of the street was next to the market. So there were people coming and going every day. Some went in for a haircut for themselves. Others took the baby in for its first month hair shave. Or they just went in and stood behind the barber, watching the customer having the haircut, exchanging the odd word with the barber or the other customers. Strangely enough, a lot of people seem to treat the barbers as a tea shop. All year round, water was kept boiling on the stove, and in winter, the stove and the steam kept the barber's shop nicely warm. In summer, the stove made the shop too hot and the barbers moved it outside. You had to keep it lit. There were no water heaters back then, so the barbers needed the stove. They would fill a pot with boiling water, take it to where a customer sat on a stool, and carefully pour it into a homemade earthenware basin with a tap in the side. Then they'd wash your hair. There was no temperature control. It all depended on how experienced the barber was. Sometimes the water was scalding, sometimes it was tepid, but no one complained. Then, out of the blue, a girl was assigned to work in the barber's shop. A female hairdresser with a round face and her hair cut in a short bob. That took a bit of getting used to. The regular customers found it strange because they were used to talking about anything that came into their heads when they came in and sat on the big swivel chair. Now there was a girl standing next to them. They had to mind their language. They became very serious. But it wasn't only them. The barbers had a hard time getting used to her too. Their work was boring without the usual banter that made the time fly by. With this girl around, Everyone picked their words carefully, and the barber's shop seemed a lot quieter all of a sudden. Only the buzzing of the electrical clippers and the scratching of the razor broke the silence. The girl wasn't happy either. Although she had her white coat on and tried to show the customers to the swivel chair, no one would go near her. The men had no faith that the girl could do a proper shave, and everyone would laugh at them if they left the shop with a badly shaved head, toilet lid style. Then there were the women customers who came in for a cut and blow dry. They didn't trust the girl either, even though they were women themselves. They wanted one of the male barbers they were used to, Wang or Li, and if they were busy, no matter, they'd sit and wait. Luckily, the girl didn't take it personally when she was cold-shouldered. If the adults don't want her cutting their hair, she would do the kids. She almost forced them into the chair and tied the white bib tightly around their necks. "What are you looking at?" she demanded. "Look in the mirror. Keep your head still. Lower." The clippers whirred decisively, and in no time at all, a circle of hair had fallen to the floor. Now you couldn't run even if you wanted to. There were exceptions to everything, however, and the older Tang boy was one of them. He walked into the barber's one day and sat down in front of the girl without a moment's hesitation. Everyone watched as he went a bit pink in the face and pointed to his head. "My hair's too long, shave it for me." The young hairdresser was caught on the hop and hesitated. "Do you want to?" she began, and she looked at the other barbers, but they looked vague. "We're leaving it to you," is what they meant. "You go right ahead and shave his head. Whatever you do, he asked for it. It's nothing to do with us." The town boy had ulterior motives, however, as everyone found out afterwards. This guy may have looked a bit dull and slow, but in fact, he was a schemer. The other guys were frantically running after the girls, but he didn't bother. He simply went to the barber's a few times and picked the girl up. His young brother, Tongue of the Pig's Heads, now had a sister-in-law, Ms. Chen, as the hairdresser was called. Fortunately, the young couple seemed pretty well matched and happy together. If she'd had any complaints, we would all have thought her a fool. That's back to you, Daniel.
Thank you so much for that, Nikki. Thank you very much for that very nice reading, and we hope that everyone in the audience enjoyed that. As you can see, I myself need a haircut, so I might take up that advice soon. We will be entering the Q&A section of this event, and if you'd be so kind, if you have any questions for any of our speakers, please do pop them in the chat, and we'll get to them once it becomes the public Q&A section. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Francis, who will be moderating the next Q&A segment. Francis, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Marvelous. Then we can hear each other. Okay, thank you very much. And thanks as ever to Nikki for a great example of why a good translation is so important, for that really fascinating extract that you read there. I'm going to ask a few questions now directed at our key speakers, and then after that, probably after about 15 minutes or 20 minutes, I'll open it up to general questions. So as Daniel just said, if anybody who is listening has got any questions to put in the chat, please do so now. However, my first question, I'm delighted that we have an expert on Sutong here with us, Professor Ji Jin from Suzhou University, who is a professor of literature at Suzhou and is also, I believe, a fan of Sutong. So my first question is for Professor Ji, and I want to ask about this concept of Sangwen, because that's something which in the UK is sometimes quite hard for us to understand. Why do you think that the genre of Sangwen is so popular in China today, and what kind of readers might choose Samhain as opposed to other genres?
季老师，我听不见您，您得把那个静音关掉。
Sorry, we can't hear you,
好，好
Mr.
了，
G.
听到吗？
Yeah, now it's working.
好，
Thank
可以
you.
了哈。好，谢谢 Francis 这个问题。
Thank you for
我
your question, Francis.
这个问题其实挺大的，那我简单
This is
谈
a
一
very
点
big
点我的一些
question.
粗略的想法哈。因为如果我
I would
们
like to
看一
give
下
a
我们
general
现
idea
在
about
现当代文学
what I
发展
think.
史，我们可以
If we
看到，
look at
也从
the
鲁迅、
history
周作
of
人到林语
of
堂、钱
prose,
钟
and
书
you look at
陈
Qian
从文，
Zhongshu,
几乎所有的
Lu
作家，
Xun,
他们都有这个很好的散文
most
作
of
品，
the
这
writers, they
构成了
have
一
their
个非
good
常鲜
prose
明
work.
的中国现代散文书写的一个传统。
And it's
当代文学
actually
当然
a
也是
very
这
big
样
part
的。
of Chinese
我
literature.
们1949年以后，一些重要
Since
的小说
1949,
家，他们很多人都写有大量的散
many
文，
of the
而且有的
prominent
人很有
writers,
非常
they
鲜
have
明的
their
个人的
prose
风格。比如
prose
说
work,
像汪
and
曾
they have
祺、
their
贾
own
平凹，
style.
像
For
我们在
example,
座的
Jia
苏童，包括
Pingwa,
穆言、余
Su
华，他们
Tong,
这些人都是这样。
Mu
所以我
Yin,
觉得
they all
在
have
某
their
种
own
意义上，
styles.
散文成为我们
I
当
think
代作家
prose
一种非常独特的
is a
言说的一
special
个
way
方
for
式，
our
这也是
contemporary
我们来
writers
理
to
解和阐
express
释他们
themselves.
小说创作很重要的一个依据。所以我
And
想这样一个
that's-
传统，
That
可能也
gives
直接影
some
响到了我们当
suggestions to
下
how they're going to
中
write
国
their
散文的一些
novels.
作者和读者。因为这些年当然确实出现了一些
In
很
recent
受欢迎的
years,
一些散文作家，还有一些很畅
we
销的
have
散文
seen
集
some
子。
very popular
比如说像这个李娟写
writers coming
新
up.
疆
For
阿勒泰
example,
地区的一些
Li
作品，
Juan,
比如说
she
牧
wrote
场、
about
遥远的向日葵
art
地，
that's in the
比如说
Xinjiang
像这
area.
个刘子超的
那
旅行文学
Liu
作品
Zichao，
他都是主要是写中亚
wrote
地区的，比如
about
失落的卫星，
Middle Asia,
还有那
about
个
the
陆清义
travel
的散文
he experienced
四个
there.
春天。所以
And
这
also
当然还
Full
有一些资
Spring.
深的作家、艺术家，他们也有一些很重要的散
All
文作品，
these
比如
contemporary
说像
artists or
阎连
writers,
科的《我与父辈》，还有那个陈丹
those
青
well,
的
well established
张佛与
ones
莫
like
心
Yan
等等。
Lianke,
所以这些作品
they
之
all
所
have
以
their
能够
own
受到
famous
广泛的欢迎，
works
我想
that is
并
popular
不仅
around
仅因为他们是
Chinese
散文，
readers.
可能更多的是因
Don't
为他们
think
打
it's the
破了
prose, the
原来
style
的
that
那种
make
陈
those
旧
work
的
very famous.
单调的一种散文的一种概
I
念，
think it's
让我们
because
重
they
新
are
理解到
pushing
散文的一种
the
可能性，
boundary. They're
还有
going
它的一个
beyond it.
无
They try
无
to
限的一
create
种疆
new
界。
styles and try
所以
new
我们可以
style,
看到
adding
这些
new
散文
elements
作
to
者，有的
their
并不是
prose
职业
work.
作家，像陆清义是一个导演，刘子
Some
超是
of
一个
them are not
媒体人。
um,
就这种非
professional
职业的
writers.
背
They
景，使得他
they're-
们在
they can be
创作散文的
directors,
时候，
but
能够
actually
甩掉一个
their
包袱，就
unique
没有那种散文
background
腔，他们
give
可以更
them
自由的、更随性的来书写。
another very
就像那
interesting
个著
part
名演员林
to
青
their
霞，
writings because
他也
they're
写
not
散文，所以去
restricted
年我
to
给
the
他写了一
style
个
of
评论，
prose.
我就肯定他的散文写作的一个无法之法。我觉得
I
这可能
think
就是散文的魅力
that
之所在，
writing prose
所以
is
它不
you have
像小
no
说那样
you have
需要
no
太多的
limitation. You
技
should
术或者
not
专业性，
be thinking
它需
always
要
in
的
the box of
可能更多的
prose.
作者是自然而然的
So
来呈现生活的本
writers
相
they。are writing
这是我一个
fluently,
简单的
they
一个理
write
解，谢
freely.
谢。
I think that's why. Thank you. That's
Thank
my
you very much.
sharing.
I think that will help provide the context for our event today in looking at the genre. Of course, as well as the genre, we also have to look at the practice of translation and how you do translate these works well into English. And first of all, if I may, I'm going to go to James Trapp, who has talked to us earlier. And James, as well as contributing to this particular anthology, also is the translator of Shadow of the Hunter, which is also published by Sinoist Press. So James, can I ask you first of all, what were the particular challenges that you found in translating Shadow of the Hunter?
Right, yes. I should preface all this by saying that I'm a very unscientific and unacademic translator. I just sort of throw myself at the work and hope for the best. Well, it's certainly, I think it's true for all translations that the most important thing is to try and capture what you feel is the voice of the author. and some authors are more elusive than others in their voice. With Su Tong Lao Shi, I don't think elusive is the right word, because the voice is very clear. It's just that it's sometimes indefinable, in that it's clear, but it's unfamiliar. And the language is, it's not complex, but there are devices that he uses, which I think hark back to earlier forms, like the no marking of direct speech and limited use of personal pronouns and things, which certainly initially is a challenge until you get used to it. But more than anything else, what I wanted to, I found myself thinking of this book actually in terms of light and darkness. I think that light is very important in it. It's often a very somber light, and that was what I was hoping to catch. The technical translating, as it were, once you got used to the rhythm of the prose, was not so much a challenge as catching this indefinable, this voice, this indefinable feeling. Looking back, I see bits of it as though it's underwater, not dangerously so, but the way the light is filtered into this somber, shifting light of shadows. Sounds weird. I mean, it's very hard to explain, but it's intense, and this whole atmosphere intensifies the emotions, but also mutes and distorts them from what we're used to. It's almost a dangerous feeling, I think. I mean, I found my wife, who's my unprofessional and unpaid proofreader, found this too. She found the book very dark, I think. I don't think it's dark, but anyway, so I'm getting carried away there. But there's no way of transferring all that feeling from one language to another. That was the feeling I got from the text as I read it. The best I could do was find ways of giving the English language a similar kind of weight. Language, I mean, obviously, as translators, language is what we use, and I love words, and I love strange words, and so on. But the danger was not to overcomplicate it by getting obsessed with choosing absolutely the right word, or finding a particularly obscure or whatever word, which would have distracted from the whole image. So it was finding a way of conveying this without it becoming ponderous, and without letting the language over assert itself. Whether I achieved that or not, I don't know. But certainly when I look back and read my own English, I think, yeah, there's a bit of that there. But and if I've caught a little bit of that, then that's great. But it was a challenging job, I have to say. It was a challenging job, thoroughly rewarding, and it's a book that doesn't leave you. It stays with you, which is an indication of obviously of its great merit, but also of the importance of getting the translation right. Whether I have or not, I don't know. I don't know if any of that made any sense to anyone apart from me, but it all comes back, as I said right at the beginning, it comes to finding the voice that the author has given his work, and trying to find some way of conveying that. Anyway, I will shut up. I know that I talk too much also, so please forgive me.
Not at all. Thank you so much for getting such a complex idea across. And thinking about that complexity, I'm going to turn to Nikki now, because I wonder if some of those complexities and finding the author's voice and so on, I wonder if they're the same across different genres. Nikki, you've translated many novels, as well as these pieces of Samhain. And I'm going to ask you then, are there any particular challenges for a translator in translating Samhain as opposed to other genres?
That's a really interesting question. I think the answer is no, the challenges are the same. I would like to say that James has taken my favorite words out of my mouth. So finding the voice, intuiting the author's voice in the original language and somehow recreating it in English. I will add to this riding two horses at the same time, while trying not to fall off both of them. That's something that you do, I would argue, with literary nonfiction just as much as you do with散文, with fiction of any kind, even with poetry, not that I'm very experienced in poetry. I mean, you have, as a translator, you have a dual loyalty. We've talked about the dual loyalty to the author and the reader, but you also have a responsibility to get things really accurate. So it's really necessary to do the research and get things accurate, but then you've got to convey it in a way which isn't too plodding. It doesn't matter whether you're translating fiction or散文or nonfiction, you often have this problem of there is a lot of assumed information. There is a lot of background material that the reader of the original is going to immediately understand. And you have to face the fact that in order to get that over in a deft enough way in the English, you may not be able to, you're not after all writing an encyclopedia. You may not be able to get everything over. But recently I've been thinking about getting the accuracy, getting things correct in terms of an iceberg. So when you translate, you do a huge amount of research quite often, whatever you're translating. And that's the iceberg. What you actually manage to put into the English is only the tip of the iceberg, but the whole of the rest of the iceberg, all the research you did, it's not wasted because it informs the way in which you translate and what you say. All of that is to say, same challenges, different genre.
Thank you very much. And then I guess if I could ask both of you and possibly Professor Yuan, if you want to join in as well, that awful question of translatability or untranslatability. Many people have discussed various contemporary Chinese authors as to whether certain authors are translatable or untranslatable and so on. And from your experience, how translatable is Sutong? Okay, Nikki, do you want to go first?
My experience of translating Sutong is fairly limited. I found these vignettes, these散文, lovely, really lovely, sufficiently challenging, not too challenging. One of the things is that he incorporates history as it has been lived by these people. So as I said, you've got to do that with a light touch. It's not particularly difficult to get that amount of history into your translation, because now readers do understand a bit about Chinese modern history. They know roughly what you're talking about. Other authors, much more difficult to translate, either because they have a very mannered style or because there's a lot of dialect, and how are you going to get your dialect into an equivalent in the English, or like some of the work of Yan Ge, who is here today with us. There are lots of swear words. I don't want to imply that all her work is full of swear words, but one particular work that I translated was. So there are many different kinds of challenges. I must say that so this work of Sutong's, I really did enjoy translating it.
Thank you very much. Professor Yuan, I haven't warned you that I might suddenly call on you. So if you feel put on the spot, feel free to just turn your video off and leave.
It's okay,
Professor,
yeah.
Professor Yuan, have you anything to add to that? Right.
Okay, yes. The translatability, I think if you don't have too many allusions, like a proverbial, a lot of things behind it, the historical, classic and stuff, but that's okay. But sometimes you don't have to translate them word by word. So you can just, make them, find some counterparts in English. They don't have to look the same on the surface, but if you can impart the meaning to the reader, that would be fine. So I think Su Tong's is very translatable. And interestingly, when I translate his or someone essays or whatever prose, I can identify with him. That's my advantage, I think, being living in China for a long time too. So when he talked about this as a student dancing, I was amazed by people dancing in there. And so I can put myself in his shoes in that scene, and I can recall, what happened to me in that similar situation. And also when he talked about reading under the street lights, I did the same, because in that time China was so poor. We lived in under one roof, so many people, siblings, and also have to read on the street, so I can identify with him. So that's my advantage as a person living in the same environment with the author, with Su Tong in particular here. So I think, that's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much. James, have you anything to add to that?
Yes, I suppose, having done both a chunk of Open Air Cinema and Huang Cixi, when I did Shadow of the Hunter, Huang Cixi first, and then Open Air Cinema came along, and initially I found it quite hard to believe that it was the same author. The lightness of touch in Open Air Cinema in these little vignettes was very different from the feeling of Shadow of the Hunter, and I found them, like Nikki, I found them a pleasure to translate because they flow so easily. I also slightly had a small shared experience with Professor Yuan in that I first went to China in the very early 1980s, and I've been going over the years. So I've seen many of the changes, and so I can appreciate some aspects, obviously not with that the same as the native, that are so clear in Su Tong Lao's writing about things that preoccupy and interest him. And that, I have to say, was a real pleasure, because I first went to Suzhou in 1983, I think, and then I've been successive. And I have this picture of what Suzhou was then. So that, I mean, that was a pleasure. Shadow of the Hunter was more difficult to initially to translate, but only until you got into it, which is, I think, true for all authors. The Sanwen are much more accessible, and as they're designed to be, and it took longer to get into Shadow of the Hunter, but it wasn't challenging in all these references to past cultural references that need to be explained, which can get very ponderous. I had that in full measure in some of the other books I did in Sun Tzu Dajuan and in Ma Pinglai's Elm Tree series, where suddenly you get patches of bursts of obscure Beijing opera or Song poetry and heaven knows what, or references to different types of tea and porcelain, which making them flow naturally is a challenge. Whereas I don't remember encountering anything in Shadow of the Hunter that really needed a huge explanation, because a lot of it was universal experience just in a Chinese context. So yeah, certainly the Sanwen was as Nikki said, was a pleasure to translate, simply for there's an underlying joy in it, but also because of the rhythm and the lightness of touch of the prose there.
Thank you very much. I've got one final very short question, which I'm going to ask, I think, both to Nikki and Professor Yuan, if I may, and then I'll open it up. So I can see there's already a few questions in the chat. So if anybody else has got any other questions they want to put into the chat, please do that now. But my final question is that sort of old marketing question. If you were introducing Su Tong's work either his novels or his Samwen, to a UK or US reader, because I'm assuming, Professor Yang, you may be more aware with the US readers, to a UK or US reader who was new to the author, how would you sell it? How would you persuade somebody to who'd never read Chinese literature before, perhaps, to read Su Tong's work? Nikki.
Nikki, you appear to be muted.
You're muted, yeah.
I carefully muted myself. Right, yes, something you can read on your phone, on your Kindle, while getting on the bus or on the tube. Something that you can read in tandem with watching Chinese films. Very filmic.
I would tell my friends that if you want to know more about me, you can read Su Tong, because you know, he wrote about everything in contemporary China I've been going through. So if you want to know about China, read him.
I have to say, I no disrespect to the book, but I wouldn't recommend Guang Cuiji as an initial read for someone who hasn't read any modern Chinese literature before. I think you need to work up to that. But the open air cinema, absolutely, because it's accessible. You can dip in and out of it, and it's taking you across lots of different subjects, different levels of society, different layers of understanding, without and giving you a broad introduction to so many aspects of contemporary and slightly earlier life in China, which, as I used to take tours out China, and I always told people, yes, it's entirely different, but the people are the same, and so many of these are shared experiences. They may be in a different context, but if you read open air cinema, you'll begin to see how much more you have in common with people from China than you thought, and I think that certainly would be a great introduction. And then steel yourself after a while and work your way up to Shadow of the Hunter.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to take some questions from the chat now. The first question from Susanna Lee, which I think possibly, Daniel, you may want to jump in on this one as well. The question is, Su Tong has mentioned he doesn't write Samwen very often. So can you tell us a bit about the whole project? How did you come up with the idea of publishing Su Tong's essays? How did you choose the texts, and so on? I don't know, Daniel or Ying, if you want to jump in on that. I'm not sure who came up with the idea initially, or if it came from the translators.
Ying, I think that's really more of a. I can talk a little bit about.
Let me answer this. Let me answer this question. Well, actually, it is. Do you want the truth or the truth?
The truth is always best. You can start by telling us a lie first of all, if you want to, and then tell us the truth. That might be even better.
Tell you a beautiful story, and then tell you I tell you the truth. And what happened was, we sort of like, obviously, Su Tong 老师 won Huang Queji, won the Mao Dun Prize. And then after that, I keep banging on the door and say, Su Tong 老师 gave me more, gave me more sort of like books. And then obviously, just happened, Su Tong 老师 said, oh, there is newly released Sanwen, in Zhejiang Wenyi. So happily, I know the lady very well. So I quickly grabbed the phone and called it, said, Su Tong 老师 next book is mine, don't give to anybody else. So basically, with Su Tong 老师, and there's several others as well, like Feng Jicai and Jia Pinhua, Zhou Daxin, people basically what they newly released, you quickly grab it without any hesitation. You just cannot grab it fast enough. So basically, my after this one, we also grabbed another one very, very quickly. That is Midnight Story. That is a short story collection of Su Tong Lao's, work. So basically, it's to try to wait until the breakthrough. I call it breakthrough, the Chinese literature, in any sort of like in English world, basically. You just have to be, if I'm telling the truth, really, what I am, people always ask me the same question, Ying, how do you pick the book? Really, you just have to be acting very quickly. You try to thinking to sort of like, those authors I really love. And then, as soon as they release anything, you just quickly act on it. Sometimes I have to say, sometimes I do not even have time to really finish reading the book before I just quickly sign it. Otherwise, you're going to be too late. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that very honest and practical answer. The next question from Wang Yan is to the translators, and it really gets to the heart of one of our key topics of focus today, which is what is this meaning of Sanwen, and perhaps how you would translate it in English. Wang Yan is saying that San in Sanwen means that the style and structure is loose, but a threading gist is usually expressed in this style. Did you try to make this represented in the translation so that English readers can get the gist, rather than assuming it's just some kind of stream of consciousness, which of course it's very different from? And if this is the case, how did you make it possible? I suspect that might be quite a difficult question to answer without preparation, but I would, if anybody of the three of you is willing to give it a shot, please do.
Well, it's difficult because I certainly, until quite recently, I didn't read the whole collection. I simply had a section of it, and the only thing you could do is let them speak for themselves. If the thread's there, you will find it. I think is the only answer I can give. It's not going to be a conscious. You're not going to, because you can't highlight things that the author hasn't highlighted because you want to show something. You just have to let it speak for itself.
Follow the flow. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I suppose. Am I muted? No.
No, we can hear you.
I would add to that yes, the advantage of having a collection of short pieces is that you can divide it up amongst many translators. The disadvantage is that if there's a unifying thread, you may lose it a little bit. I do think that the editor has a role here, and a good editor is a wonderful thing, a person. Being the first really intense reader of a particular translation. I don't know. I mean, I think that editors can say sometimes, this is the thread, have we lost it here? But in other cases, the text stands on its own. It doesn't need any propping up. It just works with all these different stories, one following the other.
And I suppose presumably having four different translators all working on pieces of prose from a single anthology, the editor's role is even more important, I guess, in maintaining that thread.
Yes. Yeah.
Consistency. Mm-hmm.
Martin had a hell of a time, definitely.
Thank you. Another question on the nature of Sanwen from Elijah Baker. Would you say that Sanwen is uniquely Chinese, or are there parallels with other languages? And his suggestion, if it's uniquely Chinese, could it perhaps achieve similar worldwide recognition to that of other Asian styles like haiku?
My impression is that when I first learned English, we read Bertrand Russell. That's a British essayist. That's sort of a Sanwen, but that's argumentative instead of a narrative. So the Chinese Sanwen is also, I think it's narrative at the same time.
Yeah, I think that there's such a huge variety of English language literature, and that's without even talking about other language literatures. I mean, what about William Cobbett's Rural Rides, which is not something necessarily that everyone will have read, but is also musings on his observations as he travelled around. I'm quite sure you could find something similar in English. Whether readers are going to take on Sanwen as something especially Chinese, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it even matters.
There was a time when English journalists were more, or the best of them were more writers than they were news reporters. And if you read things like the collected essay or newspaper pieces of George Orwell or whatever, and other people like that, you have something of the same. But the fact that they were published in newspapers is irrelevant, and they're the author bringing his own particular view onto a number of subjects that fascinate him, more because they fascinate him than because he necessarily thinks they're going to fascinate a wider audience. So I think there's a long tradition, I think, of if we look at essayists or even sketch writers, whatever. So yes, I don't think it's something that you could define in the same way as haiku, could you? I mean, haiku is something very definite, whereas Sanwen is something which, in its very nature, is not. So,
thank you all very much. Moving away from this idea of what is Sanwen, our next question is from Chalpang. A great question. Sutong has mentioned that Suzhou is a lonely city to him, and that he wants to tell stories on behalf of the city. Okay, Suzhou and Sutong, as we talked about earlier. And the questioner is wondering if the translators have encountered such an implied blue city or city of loneliness while translating the book, and how have they tried to render this kind of loneliness into English? It's a question I've never asked a translator before.
Any big city can be a lonely place, although Suzhou, of course, wasn't at that time a big city. I don't know. I think the nearest, I remember being very not depressed and for some reason Coventry I think of, because it's a city that never found itself again. You can, if you walk through Coventry, you can see how many times it's been beaten up and tried to get up and come back fighting and never quite made it. So apologies to anyone who may be from Coventry there, which is not a bad thing. I mean, it's a feeling. You do get feelings from cities, but I think they're highly individual to each city. So you're not going to find an equivalent to Suzhou, which has such a remarkable historical past and physical structure as well. So again, one doesn't have to find comparisons necessarily. You can accept things on their own terms.
Yeah, well put.
Okay, nothing further to add. And another question that we have also about the content of Sutong's work and how you translate it, from James Andrew. Sutong is well known for his sometimes dark humour. Sorry, I just keep getting email notifications which block the chat, apologies. Sutong is well known for his sometimes dark humour. As we all know, humour is hard to bring across languages. What challenges did you have when it came to translating his particular brand of humour? Nikki, do you want to go first?
Okay, yeah. Of the ones that I translated, I don't think I agree that humour is necessarily difficult to translate. I think certain types of humour, if they play on words, if they play with sounds, if there are a lot of cultural resonances, can be incredibly difficult to translate. But I think that of the Sanwen, which I translated of Sutong's, the humour is gentle and amusing on its own terms. I didn't need to do anything particularly difficult with it to bring that humour across. For instance, the Sanwen which came before the Barber was about the tinsmith, a man who's basically a ne'er-do-well and eventually has to learn a trade after many years of faffing around. And eventually, to everyone's great surprise, becomes quite a good tinsmith. And there is a gentle humor about it. There's no need to do anything particularly difficult with it to bring that humor across.
No, it's situational and observational humor, which stands and falls on its own right. And thankfully, it's when you get really irritating, complex visual puns involving characters and things like that, then you just give up. But with this, it stands on its own merits, and it does. Observations and situations translate, and then you find them funny or you don't, to a great extent. Not funny either. Funny is the wrong word. Amusing, entertaining.
Thank you very much. That's great. Unless Professor Yuan's got anything to add on that point, but if not, we have just, I think, unless I've missed one, gone through the questions in the chat, and I think we are slightly over time anyway. I did want to say if there were any questions from our friends in Xibei Daxue over there, but it will be slightly difficult perhaps for you to put questions in the chat. I'm not sure how your room is set up. Then we will, of course, happily take them. But otherwise, I'm very aware of time, and I may. Daniel, what do you think? Are we past time?
We're a little bit. I think it's a good idea probably to let especially the Chinese side go, because
late in China
for them.
Absolutely, and yes, I wouldn't hate anybody to fall asleep. Well, I think we need to bring the questions to an end, but thank you all so much for your contributions. Thanks for some great questions, and thanks to all of our guests for those really helpful, insightful, and original answers. I'm going to pass back now to Daniel to close.
Thank you so much for that, Francis. Thank you so much, and we hope you enjoyed this event. And just so you know, Open Air Cinema is currently available where all good books are sold in the UK, chief among which is our brand spanking new website. And you should be able to purchase this book on our website shortly. And we, of course, hope you would do so. And we also have another event coming up on, I believe, the 17th. Is it, Ying? 17th or 18th? Ying?
18th, isn't it?
Give me 1 second. Let me check. We have another event, which is a book club for Li Juan's Distant Sunflower Fields, and 19th. Apologies, 19th. And we hope you can join us. I think we have another one for you as well, James, for Borderless Book Club on the 18th, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, we have two events coming up. Information of which will circulate on a email after this. This event also will be going up on our various social feed afterwards. So if you feel so inclined, please do follow us on our mailing lists or socials. We'll make sure to keep you updated on there. And I think without further ado, I think I'd like to thank all of the guests for being here, especially among which Su Tong Lao Shi, Jie Jin Lao Shi, as well as Nikki Harmon, James Trapp, and Yang Hai Wang. We'd like to thank the Lee Center of New Chinese Writing and Dr. Francis Waitman and Dr. Sarah Dodds especially. And finally, we'd like to thank the two very hardworking interpreters who I'm sure are still doing my speech right now, so I'm probably not making your job very easy. Rin Zhao and Ken Qing, thank you very much for your hard work today. And yeah, shall we end it there, and then we'll catch up on the next event, shall we?
Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Wang Lao Shi. Thank you, Su Tong.
谢谢，
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
谢谢。
谢谢。
Yeah. 大家。
拜。
Bye.
好 ，Bye. Take care. 多保重，苏童老师，还有吉吉。
好，谢谢。
好，谢谢，拜拜。
保重
好，
各位老师。
拜。